Good evening and welcome to Baker House. Before we get started, could I ask you to silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate? Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Oh. If I speak louder, it doesn't matter if you don't hear me. We want you to hear Father Barron. We're delighted that you're here with us tonight. We would like to thank Aquinas College for their partnership with us in making this event possible. Father Barron will be speaking at Aquinas tomorrow at 10 a.m. All of Father Barron's books are on sale tonight for 20% off with the exception of one. His newest book, Exploring Catholic Theology, will be on sale for 25% off. His topic tonight comes from a chapter from that book, which may interest you. Also, everything in our Catholic department is on sale tonight and through the end of the week. Please stop by and visit our wide selection of Catholic product. Also tonight, we have a representative from Catholic schools. They have a table at the entryway as you come in. Please stop by. They'd be happy to answer any questions or tell you about opportunities with Catholic schools. Tonight's event will also be broadcast live on Holy Family Radio. We are grateful to them for making this available to a much wider audience. I'm not sure anyone here needs an introduction to Father Barron, but I've worked on this so long, you'll have to indulge me. Father Barron is rector of Underline Seminary and president of the University of St. Mary the Lake. He is founder of Word on Fire Ministries, which is a leading Catholic ministry on evangelism. His DVD series, Catholicism, is now the most watched Catholic documentary in history. He is widely recognized through his many YouTube videos. G.K. Chesterton said that to see the world properly, one must stand on one's head. In this way, he sees everything as hanging upside down, as literally dependent on God. Father Barron says a priest is, quote, one who dedicates his life to standing upside down in order to share his peculiar vision with the church. Tonight, he will help us stand on our head, to see the world through the icon of Jesus Christ. Please welcome Father Robert Barron.
Thank you. God bless you. Good to be with everyone tonight. I had a wonderful session this afternoon with about 30 good people that came for just a general kind of Q&A discussion and really enjoyed that. And I told them, I'll tell you the same thing, that it's really an honor to be here at Baker. I've had 3 books now of mine published by Baker or Brazos, and I'm very honored by that. And I told the group today, earlier in the afternoon, that especially now, when we stand athwart a very vigorous atheism, as well as a kind of soul-numbing secularism, it's time for all Christians to stand together for the things that we, to stand for God, to stand for Jesus Christ. And you know, the great debates of the 16th century are wonderful and interesting, and they're worth pursuing. But I think especially now, we have to emphasize what we have in common so we can face a powerful enemy, and not just a theoretical enemy, but one that's having real effects, real negative effects on young people. I see it every day. You know, secularism that flattens out our lives, that says the longing for God is not real. Well, I mean, that's going to kill people's souls. You know, because Augustine taught us long ago that our hearts are restless till they rest in God. Well, see, we all know that. Thank you, Lewis. And everybody knows it implicitly. But see, we need the church to stand up and remind people consistently of this truth in the face of a secularism that's deadening souls. So that's my little fervorino at the beginning, that we should stand together. And you know, I got this this long paper here. I'm not going to read it. You know, don't worry about that. What I'm going to do is try to teach my way through it a little bit. And what I'm talking about is something I hope can bring all Christians together, which is the conviction that we see the world through the lens of Jesus Christ. And see, we see the world for the sake of the world, if that makes sense. What's the Christian's task in the world? Is to announce what the world looks like when it's seen through the lens of Jesus Christ. And if we don't do it, it won't get done. See, because that's the true way of seeing things. But our job is to keep announcing that. That's why you don't put a light under a bushel basket, said the Lord, but you put it up on a stand so it will illumine the whole house. Part of the problem is that we Christians have put a bushel basket over the light. We're the salt of the earth, right? It's meant to make things spicy and lively and preserve what's good and destroy what's bad. If we stop doing it, we lose our saltiness. Who's going to resalt us, right? So that's the missionary task that every one of us has. And I'll be talking about it now in some intellectual terms, but that's what's behind it, is the missionary impulse. Let me start with the cartoons in the New Yorker magazine. I don't know if anyone reads the New Yorker magazine, but I get it largely for the cartoons, which are very clever, and they're funny, and I get them 95% of the time. I understand why they're funny, you know. But every once in a while there'll be a cartoon that's so kind of recondite, it's so clever or whatever, and I don't get it. Why is that funny? So what I do is I bring it to Father John Lodge, who's a colleague of mine, who also reads the New Yorker, and John is a very clever guy. And I'll say, why is this funny? And then he'll explain it to me. Now, what's interesting about the process, though, is he didn't point to anything new in the picture I hadn't seen. He didn't point to any new words in the caption. I'd seen everything, taken it all in. But I had gotten it. Now, we don't know what that means, but it's very hard to put your finger on it. When you get a joke, you understand the pattern, right? You haven't seen anything new, but you see it as something. Now, I quote here the philosopher Wittgenstein, I think the greatest philosopher of the 20th century, who said, "The thorniest problem in philosophy is, how do you see something as something?" I don't know, did you have this in the, I think it did begin in the Protestant world, but it came into the Catholic world too about 25 years ago. These little signs, they were made up of sticks in funny configurations, but if you squinted at it right, you saw Jesus. Do you remember those? Those of a certain age remember those. And they were all devoted about 25 years ago. Well, we had one up in the classroom building at the seminary, and I remember when I was a student, I would see this thing every day, and it didn't make a lick of sense to me. I don't know, just this thing with sticks. Until one day, someone said, "Well, you know the Jesus sign." I said, "Wait a minute, what's the Jesus sign? What do you mean?" "The sign right there." And then he showed me, you know, I squinted at it, I got it, and it said Jesus. And then I couldn't not see it, right? Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't not see it. But see, that's how Jesus functions for us. Think about this. An atheist, a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, all see the same world, right? We all wake up and look at the same world. What's the difference? We see it as something. We see the world, but now according to a pattern. Now, I think pattern would be a very legitimate translation of the Greek word logos. Right? NRK and logos. In the beginning was the Word. The Word by which God fashions the whole universe now becomes flesh. In Paul's language, the icon of the invisible God. The pattern by which God makes the whole world becomes flesh, so now we can see it, and we can see the world through that lens. We see it as something. That's the Christian difference. Well, let's say the sun went down, we turned all the lights out in this room. It would just become opaque to us. But in the light, we see it for what it is. The scientists tell us you never really see light, right? You just see the effect of light on things. Well, Jesus is a bit like that. I am the light of the world, he said. In my light, you see the world as it is. I want to explore this idea now, just by looking at some doctrines that come to us and help us to see the world right, and thereby help the world to see itself right. Here are the four things I'll talk about briefly. Don't get nervous, just briefly. First of all, God's nature. Jesus tells us something very, very important and distinctive about God. We Christians have a very distinctive view of God. That's why Stanley Hauerwas, one of my favorite theologians, when he sneezes, someone goes, "Oh, God bless you." He says, "Which one?" So there are a lot of views of God. Which one are you talking about? We have a very distinctive one. Secondly, we Christians are the most radically humanist movement ever in human history, and I'll explain why. Thirdly, our doctrine of creation, creation from nothing. It has remarkable implications, politically, socially, etc. And finally, the Paschal Mystery, which is, if you want, the icon within the icon. It's the center of the icon. If Jesus is the light, the Paschal Mystery is the full concentration of the light. Okay? So, first let's talk about God. And I will have my theologian and philosopher hat on a little bit here, but don't get too concerned. I see a couple of my students out here. They've been through this already. They know this routine. The most elemental insight we get about God based on Jesus is what I call the non-competitive transcendence of God. The non-competitive transcendence of God. God is other than the world, transcendent to it, right? But in such a way that he does not compete with human flourishing. Now, why do I say this? Go back to the Council of Chalcedon in 451, the great Christological council. After decades and decades of battles, the church came together and offered a formulation of who Jesus Christ is. Remember the famous language? That in Jesus, Chalcedon taught, two natures, divine and human, come together without mixing, mingling, or confusion. They come together in the unity of one person. It's a hypostatic union of two natures, divine and human, without mixing, mingling, or confusion. This matters, I'm going to argue, massively. Now, how come? Well, look at it this way. Chalcedon is holding off three options when it comes to Jesus. There was what they call the monophysite option, right? Monophysis, one nature. That Jesus is basically God. And he's wearing a human suit, you might say. He's God wearing a sort of livery of humanity. Chalcedon said, no, that's not right. The other side is a Nestorianism that would say Jesus is like a super saint. He's like a very high-level human being with an intense relationship to God. No, said Chalcedon, that's not saying enough. Then there was a middle position, Arianism, which in the ancient world made a lot of sense because it said, well, I'd say he's a little bit human and a little bit divine. He's kind of a demigod, like Hercules or like Achilles. They knew about that. Semi-divine, semi-human. You see how the Council of Chalcedon says, no. He's not God and a little bit human. He's not human with a neat relationship to God. Nor is he a hybrid of divinity and humanity. He's fully human, fully divine. Without mixing, mingling, or confusion. Meaning, in becoming human, God doesn't stop being God, right? I tell my students, don't think of God turning into a creature. No, God remains God. And the humanity of Jesus is not compromised by the proximity of the divine nature. In fact, the humanity of Jesus is enhanced. He's fully human, fully divine. The two natures coming together non-competitively. Okay. Think of this. This podium here could become ash by being burned, right? I could destroy it and turn it into something else. Or an antelope could become a lion, right? How? By being devoured. If the antelope is devoured by the lion, it becomes a lion. If this podium is devoured by flame, it becomes ash, right? But what we say now in Christianity, that God becomes human, but without ceasing to be God, nor compromising the integrity of the creature he becomes. What does that mean? It means that God is not one being among many. You see how things in the world are in a naturally competitive relationship. They can't become one another without destruction, compromise, loss of integrity. But God becomes one of us without compromising his or our integrity. That means that God is not a thing in the world, not one being among many. I'll use David Burrell's language. He's not the biggest thing around. And this is exactly why, everybody, the great theologians use this puzzling, intriguing language that God is not a being, but being itself. Thomas Aquinas, my great intellectual hero, never calls God en summum. That means highest being. He calls him ipsum esse subsistens. That means the subsistent act of to be itself. God's not here or there, not this or that, not up or down. You see, he can't be compared or contrasted in the ordinary way. He's other than the world, yes, but in this very strange way. Catherine Tanner, the theologian, says God is otherly other. He's other in a completely other way. And that very otherness makes him non-competitive to the world. Now, you think this is all just highfalutin philosophical talk? Listen to the prophet Isaiah, channeling the words of Yahweh. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my thoughts above your thoughts, and my ways above your ways. Okay, God is transcendent, God is other. But could a mother forget her child? Even if she forgets, I will never forget you. Why? I've carved you in the palm of my hand. Absolutely other, absolutely intimate. God's very otherness allowing him to be non-competitively intimate with the world. Does that make sense? See how the incarnation is just the full expression of what Isaiah saw. Of course, in the book of Exodus, when Moses asked God, "What's your name?" And that's a reasonable question, right? Well, which one are you? That's what he's asking. There's a lot of gods. Gods of the mountain, God of the plain, God of the sea, the God of the Egyptians. I mean, which one are you? What's God's answer? I am who I am. Now, one way to construe that is stop asking me stupid questions. Because that kind of question, where we're trying to grasp at and define God, is inappropriate. It doesn't work with God. Because he can't be defined, compared, contrasted. I am who I am. To be God is to be. See, to be this is to be a podium. To be me is to be a human. To be this is to be a microphone. What does it mean to be God? To be God means to be. Ipsum esse, not en summum, Thomas Aquinas. That's why Augustine can say that God is at the same time intimior intimo meo. That means closer to me than I am to myself. Et superior suo meo. Higher than anything I could possibly imagine. That's the God disclosed in the incarnation. Here's something else off of the prophet Isaiah. Now we're going to see the implications of this. Let this one be almost like a Zen koan for you. It's kind of a Christian koan. Isaiah says, "It is you, O Lord, who have accomplished all we have done." And wonderful, isn't it? Because he's not denying we've done it. But Lord, you've accomplished it. See, how is that possible? If you say, well, Father Barron, I didn't accomplish it. You accomplished that for me. You wrote the paper for me. Well, then that's just, I'm dominating you. I'm manipulating you. But Isaiah can say, with regard to God, it's you who've accomplished, Lord, all that we have done. Because ipsum esse, to be itself, is not competitive with the world of beings. In fact, lets them be. Here's the last image for you. Does that page fall to the ground? You know, again, after God gives his name to Moses, or rather, before he gives his name to Moses, what does Moses see? He sees this bush that's on fire, but not consumed. That's it. See, that revealed to him, even before he heard the name, the truth I'm talking about. The bush is on fire with the divine presence, but it's not consumed. Contrast this, by the way, with the ancient mythologies of the Greeks and Romans. When the gods appear among human beings, what happens typically? Well, things blow up. People are incinerated. You know what I mean? When the gods burst into our experience, they do it in this interruptive, destructive way because they're competitive with us. Look at this image now. The bush is on fire with the divine presence, but it is not consumed. It remains itself, but in a heightened and more beautiful way. There's the Bible. There's the Bible. There's the God that we see properly through the lens of the Paschal Mystery and through the lens of Jesus Christ, is the non-competitively transcendent God. Listen, the closer he gets to us, the more luminous and beautiful and fully ourselves we become. Does that make sense? You see, I'll get back to this in a second, but with so many of the atheists, you have just the wrong conception of God. God is a threat to human flourishing. No. God is the ground of human flourishing. And we see it through the lens of the incarnation. Okay. Second point. Radical humanism. I argue confidently that no philosophy, no religion, no social theory in history is more radically humanistic than classical Christianity. We are the greatest humanism ever proposed. How come? Well, it goes back to an adage of the Church Fathers, which I love. In fact, I was appearing at a conversation between Catholics and evangelicals, and the challenge was, name the gospel. What's the good news? So my evangelical conversation partner said, justification by grace through faith. That's the gospel. And I said, no, I don't think that's the gospel. I think the gospel is this famous phrase, Deus fit homo, which homo fieret Deus. You look at me like, hey, too bad. What that means is God became human, that humans might become God. That's the Church Fathers. The gospel said all the time, Christendom, Jerome, Origen, it's all the Church Fathers. Deus fit homo, and homo fieret Deus. God became one of us, that we might become sharers in the divine nature. That's what it means. The incarnation affects this divinizing of humanity. The Greek fathers talk about theosis, rendered in Latin as deificatio, deification. See, that's why it's the greatest humanism. Whether it's the humanism of the ancient world, the humanism of the classical world, humanism of Marxism, or whatever you want to propose, nothing's greater than the claim that we can become participants in the divine nature. And that's the claim of Christianity. Don't let them tell you that we're an anti-humanist movement. Au contraire, I would say. One way to see this thing, which is, again, applying a rather rarefied intellectual thing, but it really has implications. Not too long after the Chalcedon, a couple centuries later, we have the monothelite controversy. I know it sounds very arcane, but it really isn't. The claim here is that in Jesus there's one will, namely divine. That his divine will is so dominant that the human will just gives way. And there's only one will in him. Divine. Well, the Orthodox Church said, no. If Chalcedon is right, that in Jesus two natures come together without mixing, mingling, or confusion, he's fully divine, fully human, then you've got to say there's a divine will in him and a human will. The two wills come together in a non-competitive way. In fact, Jesus' human freedom is realized in harmony with his divine freedom. See, to get that, everybody, is to get something right at the heart of our program, and something, trust me, that the world today massively needs to hear. Human will, human freedom, is realized in connection with divine freedom and not in separation from it. Look at the philosophers of the early modern period, including very much people that shaped our American consciousness. The deists, right? That held to God's existence. I mean, God exists, but at this great remove from ordinary life and experience. A prime cause way back then or way up there. The deist God, the God of Jefferson and Ben Franklin and Immanuel Kant and many others. See what they're trying to do? They're trying to hang on to belief in God, but keep him at a very safe distance from human freedom. Don't get him too close to things, because then he'll compromise my freedom. From the deist position, it's only a very short step to the atheist position. Because if God's a threat to my freedom, wouldn't it be best just to get rid of him altogether? So I know you say he's up there way back at the beginning of time or something, but wouldn't it be just cleaner and easier to say he doesn't exist at all? And then what exists is my freedom. Now read the atheist. It's exactly where they're coming from. Ludwig Feuerbach, right, the founder of modern atheism. He says, no to God is the yes to man. That's his famous phrase. God is just this weird fantasy we've cooked up. And so the more we say no to God, the more we affirm our humanity. His most famous disciple was a young guy named Karl Marx, who read Feuerbach and said, everybody should be baptized in the Feuerbach. Feuerbach means fire brook of fire in German. Everyone should be baptized in the Feuerbach. But then Marx, of course, speculated that religion is just the opium of the people. Just this wild fantasy we cook up to make us feel better about our miserable lives. Wouldn't it be more humanizing to get rid of it and actually make our lives better? Marxism. Take another couple of steps. Sigmund Freud sees religion simply as, it's a waking dream, if you want. In our dreams, we realize our fantasies that we can't realize in life. And so in our waking world, we fantasize about justice and love and eternal life. None of it actually exists. So Freud says, wake up, grow up, get rid of your illusions and fantasies, and then you'll become more yourself. Take one more step, the next generation. Jean-Paul Sartre, right, the founder of existentialism. He summed up his philosophy by saying, existence precedes essence. It's a fancy way of saying freedom, my concrete existence, my freedom comes first, and then I determine who I will be. Does that sound at all familiar to you, folks? What was once bandied about among the Parisian intellectuals has now become, I would argue, the common philosophy of most people today in secular society. Talk to most young people. Who are you? What's your life all about? Well, I'll decide. It's up to me. Don't you tell me. Embedded within that, Sartre says, if God exists, I cannot be free. You see why? If God is brooding over my freedom, then I'm not really free. But I am free. Therefore, God does not exist. You see why atheism and existentialism go hand in hand. Why, by the way, I would argue the new atheists who came around after 9/11, Hitchens and Dawkins and company, found such a ready audience, especially among young people, who'd been simmering in the juices of existentialism for a long time. Atheism fits perfectly with that. God's a threat to my freedom. Now, can I suggest to everybody, we need to announce this Christian truth with its roots in the Monothelite controversy and the Council of Chalcedon. But what's the truth? The truth is, authentic human freedom is not threatened by divine freedom, but in fact is grounded in it, finds itself in harmony with divine freedom. There isn't one will in Jesus. The human will is not kicked out, but rather divine and human wills come together. Now, what does this look like in practice? Let me share a distinction that was really helpful to me when I first came across it. It's from a Catholic moral theologian called Sartre Pincair's, just died a few years ago. He said there are two views of freedom that are at work in our culture. One is much more classical, one more modern. And it's the conflict between them that generates a lot of tension. Here's the modern view of freedom, says Sartre Pincair's. Freedom means hovering above the yes and the no, and deciding simply on the basis of my own whim which one I'll do. I'm free in the measure that, well, I could do this or that. And I'm free in the measure that there's no internal or external compulsion to make me say yes or no. I decide. I choose. He calls that the freedom of indifference. I'm indifferently hovering above the yes and the no. Now, you see on that reading, which is the typically modern one, very common in people's minds today, what's a threat to freedom? Law, objectivity, God. Because all those things hem freedom in, right? Look, I mean, we all stop at stoplights today on the way over here, right? Stop signs, we obey traffic laws. But we didn't really want to, did we? I mean, deep down, we do whatever you want. We just drive any way you want. I don't listen to the stoplight. So we kind of grudgingly accept the law as a limitation on our freedom of indifference. Okay. Now, Pinker says that's modern freedom, but that's not classical or biblical freedom. What's biblical freedom? Biblical freedom is a disciplining of desire so as to make the achievement of the good first possible and then effortless. Let me say it again, and I'll give you examples of what I'm talking about. Biblical freedom, classical freedom, is a disciplining of desire so as to make the achievement of the good first possible and then effortless. So, I'm standing before you tonight as a relatively free speaker of English, right? Is I can say pretty much whatever I want to say in English. When I was studying French years ago, when I was over in Paris studying, what I felt often was unfree, right? Because I'd be there around the table with these smart francophones, and I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't get it. I didn't have the command of the vocabulary and the syntax and the grammar. Or you'd be in a restaurant, and the waiter would come by very impatiently looking at you, and you forget every past participle you ever do. I felt unfree a lot when I was there. Anyone that's wrestled with a foreign language knows that feeling. Now, how did I become a free speaker of English? By talking any way I wanted to. Oh, come on. For the time I was a little kid, there are all kinds of constraints and disciplines and directions and education vis-a-vis my speech, right? From my parents to my teachers to television shows to books, etc. Studying masters of English grammar and syntax, reading everyone up to Shakespeare. It's through all these disciplines that I became free. Or think of, I used the golf example earlier with the other group. But if any golfers in the room, there must be a couple of golfers. Good. You gotta help us, Suppose a kid says to you, I want to learn how to play golf. Well, just grab the club and swing any way you want. That's the best advice, is just swing any way you want. Well, how's that work out? Golf. I mean, it's impossible. Don't just follow your... No, there's a form to golf, right? And all of us golfers, we get Golf Digest and we study the diagrams and the forms, right? And I remember very vividly when I first had some formal instruction. I played golf for years with the instruction of my goofball roommate from college. And I was terrible, until finally a serious golf teacher took me aside and gave me some lessons. And you know what's interesting about that is when he got my body in the right position, just to get set up over the ball with my shoulders properly aligned and hips and all that, he said, okay, now you're rightly aligned. I felt like Frankenstein. You know what I mean? Because I've been swinging this. I said, I can barely move my arms. Now you're in the right position. Well, then, I remember he put 2 golf balls under my right foot. Because he said you do what a lot of bad golfers do, you sway away from the ball instead of turning. So he stabilized my leg. And then he said, now pretend you're a waiter with glasses like this. And I'm right behind you, and you have to turn and give me the glasses. So that's the shoulder turn, right? So I turn and goes, no, not far enough. No, not yet. And then I'm like, there, okay, there's where you gotta turn. You gotta stabilize that leg. Okay, now hit, Well, with those little moves, boom. So I wasn't, Rory McIlroy, but I was hitting the ball a lot better. Well, I remember at that point, he's a good teacher, and he said, okay, that's enough for today. And I spontaneously said, no, give me more. And see, at that moment, the little light that went on was, Lord, how I love your law, how I meditate upon it day and night. And, I mean, nobody on the first construal of freedom is going to meditate on the law day and night. Oh, the traffic laws, how wonderful can it? But see, once you figure out that law actually allows you to accomplish a good that you've always wanted to accomplish, then by God, you do love the law. And you do meditate upon it day and night. Like, I brought this with me on this trip. I bring my Golf Digest. Tonight, I'll be in my hotel room, trust me, and I'll be looking at the diagram in the Golf Digest to see how to elbow. To see what I'm driving at is, on that construal of freedom, law is liberating. Law makes us free. This is the great Christian insight. Go right back to the Monophyletic controversy. In Jesus, two wills come together, divine and human. And the human will is not suppressed by divinity, it's enhanced and made possible by the proximity of God. Keep the burning bush in mind. It's on fire, it's luminous and beautiful, but not consumed. That's the Christian understanding. And that's why this radical humanism is so central. I'll close this section with Irenaeus' ecstatic quote. And one of my great theological heroes, St. Irenaeus. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. Gloria Dei homo vivent. I told my students that if you destroy all the Christian literature and you kept that one line, you'd get the whole thing. Gloria Dei homo vivens. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. See, our coming to life is not a threat to God. On the contrary. It's what God lives for. It's what God glories in. The non-competitive transcendence of God is the ground for a real humanism. Okay, third point here is the doctrine of creation. This doctrine is deeply rooted in the doctrine of God's non-competitive transcendence, which means in turn it's rooted in the incarnation. We Christians claim that God makes the whole universe not out of something pre-existing, but rather ex nihilo, or from nothing, right? In the ancient mythologies, the gods fashioned the universe from some pre-existing stuff, from matter or energy or something. But for Christians, ipsum esse, to be itself, gives rise to the whole of finite being, ex nihilo, from nothing. Now, why does that matter? Well, this has huge implications. First of all, it means this. It means that everything is marked by divine intelligibility. Everything. If God is intelligent, God acts with purpose, and God has made absolutely everything in the universe, then everything in the universe is marked by order, pattern, design, or intelligibility. The medievals expressed this idea with their typically pithy phrase, omne ens escibile. All being is knowable. It's really interesting to me because the fights that go on between religion and science break my heart. And I say that as a Catholic priest. They break my heart. Because see, I stand with John Polkinghorne. You know that name? I'm sure his books are here someplace. High-level particle physicist from Cambridge, who at midlife became an Anglican priest, and now writes very movingly on science and religion issues. Peter Hodgson, another Englishman who does a lot of wonderful work in religion and science. The great Stanley Yaki, Joseph Ratzinger himself, all make this claim that it's not accidental that the modern physical sciences emerged where and when they did. That is to say, out of the matrix of a Christian intellectual culture. How come? Because a condition for the possibility of the rise of the sciences are two ideas that are both ingredient in the idea of creation. Namely, first, that the world is not God. And wonderful. If God makes the world ex nihilo, that means that nothing in the world that we know is God. Every bit of it was created by God, but none of it is God. That means the world shouldn't be worshipped. It means the world can be analyzed. The world can be experimented upon. It can be probed by our intelligence. If you worship the world, you're not going to analyze it or experiment on it. The sciences won't arise out of that kind of... Scientists don't aver to this because it's a mystical intuition. Namely, that they go out with such confidence to meet an intelligible world. Whether you're a psychologist, a biologist, a chemist, whatever you are, any expression of the sciences, you go out to meet a world that you are confident can be known. Now, I submit to you, say, well, isn't that obvious? No, it's not obvious at all, it seems to me. It's not obvious at all. That's a mystical intuition that the world is endowed with intelligibility. Where does that come from? The idea of creation. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. The Word was God. And God made the whole of reality through that Word. It's in a culture marked by this incarnational creation sensibility that the sciences arise. That is not accidental. And that's why the battle, as I say, between them is such a tragedy. Here's the second conclusion from Creatio Ex Nihilo, that nonviolence is metaphysically basic. Now, if you're interested, tomorrow when I talk about Merton and nonviolence, I'll say more about this tomorrow with Aquinas. But go back into the ancient myths of creation. Almost invariably, the ancient myths of creation, order comes through violence. Usually it's a god conquering another, or one set of gods conquering another set of gods. Very often the world made up of the body parts of the conquered deities is through some primordial act of violence or intervention or manipulation that order comes. Does that sound familiar, by the way? That idea, that order comes through violence. It's a very, very old idea. Then there's Christianity. What's the claim of Christianity? God makes the universe ex nihilo. That means there's literally nothing opposing him, nothing he stands athwart, nothing he has to conquer, nothing that he manipulates, intervenes upon, dominates, but rather, through a sheerly generous and nonviolent act of speech, God gives rise to the world. Let there be light. So in the poetic language of the Bible, let there be light, and there is light. Let the earth come forth, and it came forth. Let the animals appear, and they appeared. What's being conveyed in that wonderful poetry is the idea that God makes the world non-violently. Here's something from Thomas Aquinas I love. He defines creation with this little phrase: Quaedam relatio ad creatorum cum novitate essendi. It means creation is a kind of relationship to God with freshness of being. Wonderful, isn't it? What's creation? It's a kind of relation obtaining even now with freshness of being. God, that we're breathing being into us from moment to moment. Herbert McKay, the Dominican theologian, says that God sustains the universe the way a singer sustains a song. Think of an opera singer singing an aria. Well, there's God singing the world into being. The non-violence of creation. Here's the third implication of the doctrine of creation from nothing: the interconnectedness of all things. Now, to tell this story, it would take a whole semester course, but this vision I'm laying out here fell apart in the early modern period, and we've been deeply marked by it. How do we think of being and reality? We tend to think of it as isolated individuals, right? Whether it's scientifically or politically. We're isolated individuals, and we tend to be in conflict with each other. So governments are instituted to keep us safe from each other. I got my rights, you got your rights, and let's make sure the government keeps us, respectful, and we're individuals. See, prior to modernity, there's a very different view, and it was predicated upon the idea of creation. Look, if here and now I find my deepest center in God, meaning God is here and now breathing me into existence, and the same things happen to you, and to you, and to you, and even do St. Francis here, brother, sun, sister, moon, right? It's not just whistle and Dixie. I mean, that's good Christian metaphysics. If I find my deepest center, and it's the same deepest center as everything else in the cosmos, that means we are all, despite our differences on the surface, all of us connected. We're all connected to each other. I probably in my writing overused the image of the rose window, but I'll use it again now. Those great features of the Gothic churches, the great wheel of light and color. At the center of it is always a depiction of Christ. But then connected to the center by these spokes are all the elements of the window. Well, it's a beautiful picture, but it's also meant to be an image of the well-ordered soul. Is every aspect of you connected to Christ? That's the idea. But also of the well-ordered cosmos. All things connected to each other through Christ. Do you see how everybody, when you go back to the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus' ethical teaching, it's not just ethical, It's metaphysical. Why do you love your enemy? It's nice to love your enemy. No, you love your enemy because you are seeing with a deeper vision. Seeing the world through the lens of Christ, you understand that your enemy, despite all the surface antagonism, is connected to you by the deepest bonds. That's why you love your enemy. Why do you bless those who curse you? Because despite the curse, you're seeing with a deeper vision that you are connected to that person. Be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. Makes his sun to shine on the good and bad alike. So even someone that's wicked, someone that's evil, it's wicked to you, but you are connected by a bond to him or her through creation. See, if we don't tell the world this story, who will? Don't put the light under a basket. See, that's the importance of this, I think. Here's the last thing now. The Paschal Mystery. I've talked about Jesus as the icon. He's the lens through which we see reality. Well, the Paschal Mystery is the jewel within the icon. It's the hyper-concentration of the lens. The lens within the lens, if you want. What's the Paschal Mystery? The dying and rising of Jesus. We Christians are those who say the world is best viewed through the lens of the dying and rising of Jesus. Let me look briefly at the two sides of it, the dying of the Lord and the rising of the Lord. I got this from Karl Barth, by the way. I don't know what the Protestant Catholic makeup of the crowd is today, but one of the great Protestant theologians of the last century, Karl Barth, helped me see this so clearly. How many remember in the 1970s a book called I'm Okay and You're Okay? Remember that? I always liked Anthony DeMello as a Catholic spiritual writer. His rejoinder was, somebody should write a book called I'm an Ass and So Are You. It would be a much better book because the trouble is that's the philosophy of our time. I'm okay and you're okay. We're fine. Remember the Christina Aguilera song a few years ago? I'm beautiful in every single way, and your words can't get me down. It's a cool song, right? I like the song, but the words are just bizarre. It seems to me. I'm beautiful in every way, and your words can't get me down. There's, the radical self-esteem thing. Well, Karl Barth said a long time ago, whenever we're tempted in that direction, we Christians hold up the cross of Jesus. With what phrase in mind? Think of St. Peter now in that great charismatic sermon. The author of life came, and you killed him. Yeah, I'm okay and you're okay. Give me a break. I'm okay and you're okay. The author of life came. The icon of the invisible God came. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and weren't we delighted to have him? No, just the contrary. We killed him. We didn't just not listen to him. We didn't just ignore him. We actively murdered him. Now see, again, fellow sinners. I stand before you. I love when they ask Pope Francis, how would you describe yourself? He said, I'm a sinner. That's great. That's someone who's been sitting in front of the cross of Jesus a lot, right? Because we all know that truth. That if the Lord walked into this room right now, we'd likely be in the crowd calling for his crucifixion. I'm okay, you're okay. We're the ones who put the author of life to death. All is not well with us. See, unless we get that, we're not going to be open to salvation. That lovely Advent hymn, I always remind people at the beginning of Advent, oh, come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel, that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appeared. Do we get that? Can you enter into those words? A desperate cry, oh, come, Emmanuel, ransom captive Israel. I'm hopelessly captive until you come to save me. See, until you get that, until amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Until you get that, you will not be open to salvation. That's why I'm okay, you're okay. That's not harmless. That's dangerous, inimical stuff. I'm beautiful in every way. That's dangerous stuff. No, I'm a sinner. And it's the dying of Jesus, the cross of Jesus, the wounds of Jesus, speak that truth to us. The great story about Teresa de Avila, the Spanish mystic, who often had visions of the Lord, but occasionally the devil would appear to her, and often in disguise. So one time, the devil appeared in the guise of Jesus, and she took one look at him and said, "Be gone, Satan." And before he left, he said, "Well, how do you know I was a fraud. And she said, because you have no wounds. That's not the giveaway. Is beware of the woundless Christ, because the wounds of Christ are a judgment upon the world. That's why even the risen Jesus, what's he do? Look at my wounds. He shows his wounds to them. So that's the first side of the Paschal Mystery, is the death of Jesus as a judgment upon the world. I'm going to skip a couple things. How much time do I have? Was 8? I'll skip a couple things. How about, I'll just tell you one aspect of our woundedness. This could be a little long talk, of course, our woundedness. I'll give you one aspect of it. Jesus battles individual sin, that's very clear. He battles collective sin. He knows all about that. Sins of institutions and governments and all that. But we all know that in the Bible, there's a third level that stands behind the first two, is more elemental, more fundamental. It's the demonic level. It's the spiritual warfare. We battle not flesh and blood, but powers and principalities, Paul says. Right? The spiritual evil that influences both collective and personal evil. The Bible's got two great names for this power, doesn't it? Ha-diabolos and ha-satanas. Ha-diabolos, el diablo, or the diable, devil, come from that, right? And we know diaballein in Greek means to scatter, to throw apart. See, and that's our wickedness. That's the face of sin and suffering, is a scattering. That's why Origen said, ubi divisio ibi peccatum. Where there's division, there's sin. So the scattering power. What's Jesus doing now in his whole life? What's he doing? But gathering Israel. He's a great gathering force. Remember in Mark's Gospel when Jesus stands still, but they come at him from all sides. Wherever he goes, he's magnetic. He reaches out to the woman at the well, the man born blind, to Zacchaeus. He practices open table fellowship. He's not just being a nice guy. He's battling the diabolic. You see, I'm driving it. He's battling the scatterer. He becomes the uniter. The 12 apostles, now the united tribes of Israel, finally back together. What's Paul doing, by the way? Running around the whole world that he knew, but trying to gather in the scattered tribes, first of Israel, but then of the new Israel, the church. Look at us now, how wonderful, on this continent that Paul never knew existed. But here we are gathered around Christ. That's how he battles the diabolic. But the second name of the dark power is Satanas, right? Satan comes from that. And it means the accuser. Right? The accuser. Here I rely on the wonderful work of René Girard. I don't know if you know his work. He's a contemporary Catholic scholar. But Girard says that, let's be honest, every form of human organization, he thinks, in the fallen world is marked by the satanic. It's marked by accusation or scapegoating. Now, once we see this, you see it everywhere. We're sitting together around a table, we're just chatting about the weather or the Cubs, not the Cubs here, the Tigers. Are you talking about Tigers here? I guess? They're my team, by the way. I grew up in Birmingham, Michigan, outside of Detroit. So I don't know if I pointed at Birmingham or where, I like the Tigers. So we're talking about the Cubs and the Tigers, but then what's going to happen within probably 4 minutes? What's going to happen is we'll start talking about somebody else, right? We'll start blaming or accusing. Did you hear that? What she did? Oh, I heard that too. And something else she did. Right? And if you come by that table and everyone's involved in this kind of scapegoating stuff, don't you want to get involved? Most of us might. Let me get into that conversation. But then, of course, we tremble a bit when we get up and leave the table, right? That the group will now turn on us. Or look, what's the famous thing about academics? What's the only thing that two academics can possibly agree upon? How poor the work of a third academic is. That's the one thing. And some people say musicians, you can change this thing. But, that's on now the relatively trivial scale, but then, bring it up to the national level, how often we need enemies to blame. We need some group or some people that they're the ones responsible. Now classically, Hitler and his evil genius knew exactly how to manipulate this. In the wake of World War I, German society had collapsed, and, what will bring the country together? Our common blaming of the Jews. who stabbed us in the back. That's why we lost the war. That's why the economy is so bad. That's why our artistic life is so bad. It's the Jews behind it. And what Hitler did, and whipping the whole nation up in a demonic frenzy, was he brought them together in a satanic way around blaming. Now, watch Jesus in the Gospels, how he overcomes the satanic. The best example, and we have more time to go into it, the best example is the woman caught in adultery, right? Where this religious mob is forming precisely around the blaming of this victim. And they bring her to Jesus like a storm cloud gathering. They bring her to Jesus, and they want him to blame her. And of course, he famously writes on the ground. Augustine said he's writing the sins of all those who are standing around. We don't know what he wrote. But then, let the one among you without sin be the first to cast a stone. And then the storm cloud breaks up. Because Jesus undoes the satanic community, which is a false, a phony community. Because he wants to build the kingdom of God, not on a satanic foundation, but he wants to build the kingdom of God, right? Which is based upon love and forgiveness, not accusation. Much more we say about that. But see, I bring it up because what's the cross? Judgment on the world, yes, because the author of life came and we killed him. Why did we kill him? Because we like the diabolic and we like the satanic. Let's be honest about it. We like to scatter and we like to accuse. And so when the embodiment of God's kingdom came, a mob formed and put him to death, right? Now, how did he fight? How did he fight? Not with the weapons of the world, not with a counter-accusation, not fighting violence with violence, but the icon of the invisible God who makes the whole world through an act of nonviolent love swallowed up the diabolic and the satanic with the words, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. The forgiveness coming from the cross is the swallowing up of the world's dysfunction in the ever greater mercy of God. Now, mind you, as I mentioned, when the risen Jesus returns, he always does two things. He shows them his wounds. See, don't downplay that. Don't forget what you did. The author of life came and you killed him. But then he says, Shalom. Shalom. What's the shalom of the risen Christ? It's not just a pleasant greeting. It's the peace the world cannot give. The world's peace is based on some form of counter-violence. There's a temporary lull in hostilities. But the peace the world can't give now is the forgiveness that comes from God that swallows up the dysfunction of the world. That's why I say, I think in the Catholicism series, that when Paul says, I'm certain that neither death nor life, neither angels nor principalities, neither height nor depth, or any other creature could ever separate us from the love of God. Right? It's in Romans. How does Paul know that? Because we killed God, and God returned in forgiving love. What that means is, I can't shake this power. I killed him, and he came back in forgiving love. And that means that all sin can be swallowed up in the ever greater divine mercy. Well, listen, everybody, that's our message to the world. That's the face now of the non-violent, non-competitive Creator God. That God now become one of us without mixing, mingling, confusion, or competition. That's the face of the living God. And our task, with intelligence and with enthusiasm, is to keep announcing that Christ to the world. God bless you all tonight for coming and listening.
Okay, we're going to take a few minutes for a few questions. I I am a salesman, so I have to tell you. He said I have to skip a few points, but you don't have to miss out. You can buy his book tonight, 25% off. Find out what those few points are. We've got a couple of people with microphones. Raise your hand. We need you to keep your questions short, so we're not going to take a lot of time with this.
Please go ahead.
So I'm a scientist, and I wonder what is the mechanism that drives us for that diabolos and that Satanas? What causes us to want evil? What's the thirst?
I think it's fear. I mean, I go with, perfect love casts out all fear. It doesn't cast out hate, it casts out fear. Fear is more fundamental. Hatred and pride are functions of fear. It's a fear, there I go with Paul Tillich, it's a fear born of our own finitude. So what does God do? God joins us in our finitude. So not to eliminate it, but to redeem it. And it's a fear born of that. A perfect love, if I know that I'm grounded in the love that here and now makes the universe, I don't have to be afraid. If I'm not afraid, I don't have to lash out in that diabolic and satanic way. So I think it's fear.
In the back, hold the mic very close to your mouth.
Like, is this way?
Yeah.
That's good. So at first I wasn't going to attend your talk tonight because I was going to see you tomorrow at my school. But when I saw the subtitle of your talk about the Catholic Intellectual Tradition, which is the name of one of my courses for next semester, I had to attend this evening. So my question is this: what advice can you give to me as a student who hopes to espouse such a Catholic intellectual tradition, both in studying it and articulating such a tradition and studying it, and especially when I'm discerning the future of my studies and whatnot, going forward to potentially graduate school and whatnot?
Yeah, what I would say is I've become a crusader against dumbed down Catholicism because my generation got a dumbed down Catholicism after the council. And the council was not a warrant for it, by the way. The council was written by very smart people. And the cream of the intellectual crowd, mid-20th century, de Lubac, Danielu, Ratzinger, Wojtyła, Karl Rahner, the best minds. But then why did my generation get banners and balloons? And then you know what I'm talking about? But then we had nothing to offer the next generation. So I would say to you, a young man interested in the Catholic intellectual tradition, good. You've been inspired by God to do that. Learn it, study it, internalize it, learn how to articulate it in a smart, compelling way to the new generation, because we can't afford to lose another generation. We've lost almost 2. And they say more than 2 generations, the faith will just disappear. And so I really do think it's not the whole of the thing, but a big part of it is people like you who have the panache and the intelligence and the interest to read Aquinas and read Bonaventure and read Augustine and everybody else. I maybe you heard the stories. I've said it many times in different settings, but about my niece when she was a senior in high school, in a famous Catholic high school, and her books were on the table, getting ready for the school year. My brother said, "Hey, look at Neela's books for the year." And on the top was Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet in its entirety. Under that was Virgil's Aeneid in Latin, right? Under that was Einstein and science equations, and and under that was a big paperback with a picture on the cover, big print, and la. That's her religion book. And it drove me crazy. Here the kid is reading Hamlet in English classes. She's reading Virgil in Latin. So I went out and I bought her the first volume of the Contra Gentiles. I bought her Augustine's Confessions, Bonaventure's Feast Day Today, Mine's Road to God, and I think Chester's Orthodoxy. And I just said, here's the Catholic versions of the other books you're reading. Why are we reading comic books in religion? Anyway, I'm sorry about that speech, but that's my further read.
One more in the back, okay.
Please.
Hold it close to your mouth, very close.
On the Pope's new encyclical, particularly regarding its potential to move Catholicism from a more anthropocentric view of creation to a bicentric nature. And
no, I agree, and that's precisely the right way to read it, I think. To me, the key is Romano Guardini. When Bergoglio went to Germany for his doctoral studies, he never finished them, but he went to Germany. He wanted to study Romano Guardini, and Guardini was one of the great prophets of just what you were saying, that modernity had given us a very human-centered, technocratic view of life. And Guardini wanted to recover a very vivid sense of how we belong to a much wider natural context. Go get a book called Letters from Lake Como, and it's essays that Guardini wrote, and then read Laudato Si. And I think you'll see an awful lot of Guardini, and it's exactly the point you're raising, that we need a different and really pre-modern sense of the world. Pre-modern is not bad. We have such a prejudice, that modernity was such a watershed, we don't want to go behind it. Well, yes, I do in many ways want to go behind it. And that's what the Pope's doing, I think.
One more, go ahead.
Please.
I, like this young man going to grad school, am very good with the intellectual Catholic tradition and am very proud of it and definitely agree with that's why we have science in the way we do, is because the world is not God. However, I've heard many times in my local parish or other parishes that not everyone is going to be able to grasp God in an intellectual way, that we need to get them through the heart and whatnot, even though a lot of people, the secularized world is attacking our intellectual culture. So, okay, weirdly, who is our biggest enemy against our intellectual tradition? Is it Christians? Is it Catholics who don't know the tradition, our intellectual tradition, and think it should be about just being able to feel God and just kind of heart fruity stuff? Or is it the world? Is it the atheists, the deists, the people who are like, well, why should I care if two men get married? It doesn't affect me. So who is it that this intellectual tradition really needs to get out to? Is it really, do we have to start really in our own church, or do we have to go out into the world?
Well, but to your point, I think we met the enemy and it's us, as we say. I do think the enemy, in many ways, we've done it to ourselves. And that's the tragedy after the council, not because of the council. I want to stress that. But after the council, we did dumb ourselves down. And our own educational establishment, I think, dropped the ball in many ways. So I would say that. I think we ourselves are to blame. Now, as Fanny O'Connor said, what's the solution? Well, you all have two eyes and a brain, she said. You can open up a book and you read it and learn it. So we need to recover, and that's why people like yourselves to lead the next generation in how to read these great texts and unpack these truths that I was trying, I'm sure inadequately, to present tonight. But these are the truths that will set the whole world free. They're not just our little private truths, but they're for the sake of the world. But we've got to know them well enough and have the panache to announce them. So I think it's a call to us. It's a discipline we have to rediscover.
Okay, Father Barron, thank you on behalf of Baker Brook House and West Michigan here. Thank you so much for coming out.